Finally, Quake 2's remaster has arrived, and there's lots that we need to talk about. So, let's roll the intro. After making the remaster of their critically acclaimed game, Quake from 1996, it's only logical for id Software to move forward and also remaster their critically acclaimed and extremely influential game from 1997, Quake 2. As it's only been, 26 years since it came out, let's talk about Quake 2, in brackets, 2023, or Quake 2 Remastered, or Quake 2 Enhanced. I don't think they can figure out what they want to call it. Anyway, this remastered port of Quake 2 was developed by id Software and Night Dive, with Night Dive working on quite a lot of other ports of id Software's older games and also the Quake 1 remaster. Oh, and Machine Games, the developers of the modern Wolfenstein series, have also got a little treat for all of you to have a look at, and we'll go over that later in the video, because, it's not really a little treat, it's quite a large treat. The game was both announced and released last Thursday during QuakeCon. However, some members of the community did end up getting review copies of the game. Not me. Please, id Software, seriously, please, next time you make a game, just contact me about a review copy. I'm actually begging you. But aside from my sad rambling, that is about all the basics of this. But we still don't know what the actual game is like, or if it's any good, so let's talk about that.
Computer updated.
Right off the bat, this is a remaster, and with a remaster, you best make the graphics as good as you possibly can without ruining the original game. Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary. Anyway, they did deliver on that front. This game looks great. It boasts improved lighting, shadows, particle effects, fog, animations, and probably a few more things that I'm missing out here in this list. It really adds an incredible atmosphere to what was already a decent atmosphere in Quake 2's often cold, dark, and gloomy Strogg hallways in arenas. One of my favourite things about the new visuals are the game's explosions. They look amazing. They're just so satisfying, and they're so much better than the base version of Quake 2's explosions, as they kind of felt a bit flat and lifeless. And they also looked a bit funny when it was meant to be a giant explosion and there was just loads of small little particles flying around the air. The game has a whole load of options for the graphics too. Like pretty much every modern game and modern remaster, it lets you play the game in higher frame rates and a higher resolution than you originally could. And just like the Quake 1 remaster, it also lets you enable and disable many of the newer graphics options. So if you're wanting a more authentic Quake 2 experience, then you still have that option, which I think is a really good thing about these remasters. And hopefully, if they continue to remaster the Quake games, that this continues. Other smaller details about the graphics would be something such as them adding a muzzle flash to the guns finally, as they didn't have them in the original version of Quake 2 for some reason. I mean, that might just be a problem with the source port I was using, but most people I've seen talk about Quake 2 have had the same issue. Oh, and I'd also like to add that I recommend turning off texture smoothing, as for me at least it makes the game look a lot better, and I really enjoy looking at the really pixelated, cool looking textures. However, that is just personal preference, and if you prefer smooth textures, then it's kinda weird. Other visual things that are kind of a quality of life improvement in some areas that aren't really graphics things that I'd like to talk about is, for instance, it shows you where you're getting shot from. This is a common feature in most modern FPS games, and it's great to see it here. However, I did rarely ever actually notice it, as it is kinda small. The game also has hit markers, which I turned off immediately upon playing the game, as they're kind of ugly. I also went and changed the base crosshair, as it's way too big on the screen. But thankfully they do give you a lot of options for your HUD, and honestly that's something I really like about this game. The whole heap of options lets you completely customize this game pretty much. Well, I wouldn't say completely customize it, but at least visually. And in fact, also like the Quake 1 remaster, and I think some of the other Doom ports, the game has a heap of accessibility options, which is honestly one of my favourite things about these games. It allows so many more people to play the Quake games. This is overall just making stuff like easier to read on the screen and things like that. It's nothing too special, but it's still great to have. But now we're getting to the good stuff. This remaster not only includes Quake 2's campaign, but also The Reckoning and Ground Zero, which are both of the game's expansion packs. Oh, and it also lets you play Quake 2 64 in its entirety, which isn't a lot, it's like an hour or two, but still. And also, some things with Quake 2 64 are a bit different, as Quake 2 64 originally used the Quake 1 engine, and not Quake 2's engine, which means there was some differences in some of the visuals and the way some of the enemies worked. but this version of the game just uses the normal Quake 2 enemies. Which is fine, I guess, but it's a little inauthentic. However, most people aren't going to realise this, because I doubt many people have actually played Quake 2 on the 64. But Beansprout, didn't you also mention that Machine Games left something in this game for us? Well, that they have, and they've created an entire new campaign for Quake 2, just the same as they did for Quake 1. This new campaign is called Call of the Machine, which sounds like a metal band's name, and I absolutely love it. It feels like they took all the best parts of all the Quake 2 campaigns and mashed them together for an absolutely amazing experience. I haven't beaten it yet, but there is some incredible stuff in here that I'm not going to mention in this video, as it's a really big spoiler and you really need to experience it for yourself. But yeah, Call of the Machine works a bit more like Quake 1. It starts you off in this main hub world. I don't know why this is the hub world, because there's a lot of strong logos all over the boxes and stuff, but okay. And each part of the game is its own self-contained thing, and you play as a different Marine each time. However, they all do kind of follow into each other, and I'm probably going to give this its own video at some point in the future. But the graphics and all that aren't the only thing that's been changed, because the gameplay has had some changes too, so I think that's something we really need to talk about.
Computer updated.
Alright.
I know that sounds bad.
But the changes to Quake 2's gameplay are kind of for the better in my opinion. First off, we'll go over the more simple ones, like having a dedicated button for your equipment. This brings up a wheel that's kind of like the weapon wheels you see in most other modern id games, and it allows you to cycle through all of the equipment and abilities you have, such as quad damage, environment suits, adrenaline, and all the other ones. This is honestly a godsend to this game, as the equipment is something I never really used outside of the quad damages, as it was kind of confusing to use them. The source port I used had them all bound to their own individual keys, and I could never figure out which ones they were, as it didn't say in the keybinds for some reason. But this new equipment wheel has led to me using all the power-ups way more than I originally did when I first played the game. And on a somewhat unrelated note, the quad damage looks really cool. It gives you like a purple outline around your player character, and it just looks awesome. But one of the best things that the equipment wheel actually introduces to us is the compass. A new ability which is amazing for first time players. Quake 2 can oftentimes be kind of confusing for first time players. A lot of times you can get lost and not really know what you're supposed to be doing. I know the game says computer updated, but it's still not that much help, as it'll give you an objective like go do this thing, and you're like, I don't know where this thing is. So now with the compass you just open it and it gives you like a Forza style track for you to follow along, and it makes it so much easier to navigate around this game's world. This tie is... Jesus Christ. I'm taking this off. There's also the normal weapon wheel too, which is also, it's in pretty much all their games. And it's only really console players that are going to end up using it, isn't it? Something really cool though is that some of the enemies have been changed quite a bit. At first you may think this is kind of a bad thing, and they're going back and tampering with their old work when they shouldn't be. But what they've done is they've kind of fixed the enemies the way they were originally supposed to be. You see, some enemies had cut animations and cut attacks that were just weren't in the original version of Quake 2. But now in the Quake 2 remaster, they've been restored. I first noticed this when I was playing through the game and I heard then I looked up to only see a berserker flying through the air at lightning speed, about to slam me in the face with the big thing on his hand. He now kinda works a bit like the one in Quake 4, as he's actually dangerous and electric. And it's not just the berserker who's been changed, but yeah, most of the AI feels a lot more aggressive and intelligent now, and this leads to a lot more interesting encounters. And along with being more aggressive, they are also more defensive now, because I had a few times when I was fighting lower level enemies where I was shooting at them and they just hit the deck and went prone. Which I think is something really cool to see. There's a lot of things with the enemies that were in the original version of Quake 2 that have just been ramped up so that they happen a lot more often. Overall, the game feels quite a bit harder too. I don't know if I'm going crazy, but it feels like there's a lot more enemies on the screen at once now. But I'm not sure if I'm correct on that, so don't quote me on it. Apart from those changes, Quake 2 is pretty much the same experience from 1997 though, and while surely that would be more than enough for a remaster, there's also a whole heap of other things that we need to talk about too.
Computer updated.
This section is going to be the shortest part of the video as I don't have much to talk about, but in this remaster they did add something that I thought was really cool, and a lot of you may find this stuff very interesting, and it's all contained within the id Vault. The id Vault contains pages and pages upon pages of development history for Quake 2. I'm assuming that id Software went through a lot of time trying to find all this stuff and digging it all up from the company's past, and I think this is really cool. It also includes never before seen concept art, unused assets and models for enemies and stuff like that, and I'm pretty sure it even includes the E3 demos for Quake 2 that are now completely playable in this version of the game. And if you're curious at looking at stuff like this, then I highly recommend you go and have a look in the remaster. But as a remaster, this is exceptionally good. But you still may be on the fence about playing Quake 2 itself. So if you'd like to learn more about Quake 2, like the actual game, then I highly recommend you watch this video right here to learn more. I'm now going to go take this off. This is actually kind of uncomfortable.